Thanks so much, everybody. My name is David Spataro. I teach in political science and geography at Bellevue College. We're going to just continue to let people in, but we'll start the programming now. I want to welcome everybody to our Earth Week event titled Culture is Power, featuring artist Favianna Rodriguez. This event is a part of Bellevue College's Earth Week, where we're exploring topics around the theme, the future is now. And we're envisioning and striving for a just and sustainable future for all. And you can see all of the upcoming and previous scheduled events, and some events are asynchronous and can still be completed by going to bellevuecollege.edu/sustainability. I and possibly Amber Nicholson from the Office of Sustainability will be posting that link in the chat as well. Before we get started, I do have a couple of just procedural and logistical things to cover. You're muted upon joining this. This is not using the webinar setting, so everyone is able to unmute when the question and answer session comes about. We do encourage you to stay on mute until that part of the presentation, or if you have a question to ask, because obviously, we don't want outside sounds to intervene and disrupt the presentation. The event is also being recorded, and so please, for engagement purposes, if it works for you to have your camera on, please do so, because obviously that can make a talk more dynamic and more engaging. However, because it's being recorded and because of all the issues related to Zoom and being I'm in my bedroom right now, of course, it's perfectly okay to turn off your camera if you prefer not to have a recording that involves you. Also, please feel free to change your name if you feel you need to do so in order to not have your name on a recorded video. If you have to leave because we're recording it, it will be available on the Bellevue College Sustainability website. For the best speaker view, for the best experience, please select speaker view button on the top right corner of your screen. And before I introduce Vanessa, who's going to introduce Favianna, I do want to pause for a moment to read our land acknowledgement. We pause to acknowledge that Bellevue College resides on the traditional and occupied land of the Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future. And that includes, but is not limited to, Snoqualmie, Suquamish, Duwamish, Nisqually, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. We honor their connection to the region, pay respect to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and stand in solidarity through their struggles with continued systemic oppression. We commit to care for the land and water, and center equity at the core of our learning and unlearning. And I do want to just take a moment to flag that one of these indigenous nations, the Duwamish, whose land I'm on right now, is in a struggle for federal recognition. And that's an important struggle that I think that we should all participate and join to ensure that one of their core goals right now is federal recognition. And of course, I also do want to say that why do we do this land acknowledgement? I think it's important to at least take a moment to also say we don't do it just because we're acknowledging, we do it because we're asserting and affirming a politics of transforming settler colonialism and moving in the direction of land back and in the direction of sovereignty for indigenous nations. I do want to now pass it off. I want to say thank you to the Office of Sustainability and Amber Nicholson for her help on this. I also want to thank El Centro Latino who helped to co-sponsor this event. And I'm going to pass it off to Vanessa Laura Garibay. And thank you so much, Vanessa, and welcome everybody.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really excited about today's event. So as David said, my name is Vanessa Laura Garibay. I'm the program coordinator for Bellevue College's Latinx program, El Centro Latino, and I just want to say quick words about today's speaker. So based in Oakland, California, today's speaker's work addresses a variety of issues with themes as such racial equity, gender justice, and important for our Earth Week, climate change. Her work is incredibly unique as it comes from the perspective of first-generation American Latinx artists with Afro-Latinx roots. She actually just finished a public art installation at San Francisco Pet Center, and with that, it is my pleasure to pass it off to artist, cultural strategist, and social activist Favianna Rodriguez. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming me. I am joining you from occupied Ohlone territory, also known as Oakland, and just really excited to be here with all of you. I want to hold space for just have a moment to reflect on the ways in which Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities have been really impacted over the last 2 weeks, over the last 500 years really, but especially in the last 2 weeks, the level of violence we have seen and collective trauma is significant. And I just want to name that soon there will be a verdict in the trial. And it's a moment in our history where we are coming to terms with the real harm that racial violence has done in this country. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is how we change culture, right? How we really leverage the tools of art and culture for social change. But we are in a cultural moment right now. And so please take care of yourselves, and also just, open your heart to feel what you're going to feel today. And remember that regardless of how the verdict plays out, this system is guilty for impacting in so many ways people of color. So just want to send big love out to folks, especially the BIPOC students joining us. And I'm going to get started on my presentation. And so I'm an artist, and the way that I tell stories is through images. And I'm going to be sharing with you some of my philosophies around art, some of the things that inspire me. And please, we will have a Q&A, but go ahead and, I love to hear your enthusiasm and to, just see how some of this stuff is landing for you. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and then I'm just going to ask, if folks can see the right screen. So first, can everyone see an image that says our common home? Can you do thumbs up? Great. And can everyone see a wave? Great. It works. So I'm so happy that I get to talk during Earth Week, because I am an environmentalist, and a lot of my work is centered around the way in which systems, whether it's colonialism or white supremacy or patriarchy, has hurt human beings, but has also hurt the natural world, right? The animal kingdom, and of course, Earth itself. And so this week is Earth Day, and we're celebrating 51 years of Earth Day on our common home, because we only have one place to live, and that's our Earth. And so just want to name that this week is the moment for us to really think about our relationship to the planet, but to also understand how climate crisis is connected to racial injustice and to the exploitation of all living beings. So I work in the realm of culture. I am an artist, and I understand that culture surrounds us all the time. It is the ocean in which we swim. And we shape culture, and culture shapes us. And culture is really the set of stories that we grew up with, right? So we grew up with certain stories around gender. We grew up with certain stories about where we get our energy from. We grew up with stories around race, right? Around all the isms and all the constructs are based in myths, right? And we organize our world around these myths. And so as I work in the realm of culture, I always have to remember that culture is like water, and that just like you throw a rock into a water and it will create ripples, all of us have the potential to change culture. Culture can be changed by one person, right? Whether that's Colin Kaepernick, who takes a knee and who takes on one of the largest and most powerful corporations, or it might be the story of Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, right? The stories that really shake us and help us see something we may not have seen before. Art and culture are powerful because we can put out ideas into the world to help change consciousness and to help change the way people think. And I'm going to be explaining to you how it is that culture works and why it's so powerful. This is a photo of me when I was a kid. I grew up in Oakland during the war on drugs, and it was a really painful time. My hood was suffering from police brutality, addiction. You know, drugs had been brought into our neighborhoods, and people were getting locked up for marijuana. You know, today's 420. It is so fitting to talk about marijuana because I really saw how we lost many loved ones to the system of mass incarceration. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was just really neglected. And I would always wonder, like, wow, our government doesn't care about us, you know? And I feel like I was a part of people who were treated like second-class citizens, right? There was a lot of violence in the community. There was police brutality, and also the air was dirty. I lived in a food desert. And for me, art was a way to escape all of that and to create another world for myself. It was a safe place where I can imagine something different for myself. And so I really submerged myself in art, and my parents, especially my father, were very supportive. And the other thing that I experienced growing up that really inspired me to be an artist was that I didn't see depictions of myself on TV or in pop culture. You know, as a Latina who grew up in a mixed race family, I just didn't see myself. I mean, Dora the Explorer didn't exist yet. Selena wasn't a thing yet. And there was no reflections of myself in American culture. And not only that, on Spanish language television, I also did not see my Black grandmother or my Black father. I didn't see them reflected back. And that really impacted my sense of self. And it is why today I am committed to creating images and stories, because I was just so tired of being invisibilized. And it continues to be a problem. You know, today in the US, Latinx people make up 50 million. We are a very diverse, we're not a monolith, we're a very diverse, mixed race and racially diverse group of people. And yet our stories are not in the media, similar to Asian Americans, similar to Indigenous people, similar to Black people, right? And that's what racism does, is that it disappears. It forces a binary that disappears complexity. Right? And so when we do think about Latinos, we do not think of Afro-Latinos. We don't think about Indigenous, our Indigenous roots. And so my purpose as an artist is to reclaim all of that, but also to show the complexity of my lived experience. So this is the neighborhood in which I grew up, and this nifty little tool, which is called the Cal Enviro screen, allows for anyone to understand the levels of pollution that are in their community. So as you can see here, there are two freeways, right? I'm sandwiched in between two freeways. I live in that big black dot where that's where I live. And I grew up here. I still live in my home where I grew up. And if you notice, there's a freeway that runs along the red part. Well, that freeway is one of the busiest freeways on the West Coast, right? It moves things from the Oakland airport to the Oakland port. And what do you all think is causing this level of pollution? Well, it's trucks. It's the idling trucks. And if you notice, there's also a freeway up in the green area, right? There's two freeways actually. And yet somehow that freeway doesn't have the same levels of pollution. Well, why is that? And what it is that up in the green parts is where white people live, mostly white people. And in the 1970s, they organized so that trucks would not pass through their freeway. And so my community and many communities of color bear the brunt of dirty air. And this is the reality. This is not just Oakland. This is the entire country, right? People of color live in polluted neighborhoods, and we are delegated to the dirtiest places. And that's environmental racism. I mean, I'll tell you how bad it is. People in my hood live 12 years less than people in the green zone, which is only 2 miles away. And so when I was a kid, I would notice a lot of people had asthma, but I didn't really understand the roots of it. And I didn't understand the connections because this was invisible, right? Pollution is fairly invisible. And as I grew older and I began to understand that we were literally being subjected, and we are being subjected to a form of slow violence. And it really inspired me to become an environmentalist, because I've lived through it and I have such, it's just so tremendously unjust that people of color have to get sicker and really have to pay a price. And let's not even talk about how this creates a more vulnerable population for COVID. But this is what many hoods look like. I mean, this is Compton, this is East LA, this is Long Beach. And so for me, as an artist, it's about what we see. How are we seeing something that we may not have seen before? Because you can't see pollution, but now you can with this tool. And that is really, it represents my purpose, which is to be able to tell stories that transform worldview. And what is worldview? Worldview is how we interact with everything in the world around us, right? And so I recognize that the way that I experience life as a cisgender woman has a lot to do with systems of domination. And those systems of domination not only affect me, they affect other bodies, other female bodies, like the earth, like cows, like animals in factory farming. And so for me, I'm about changing worldview, because it's not just about climate. It's not just about racial justice. It's not just about, animal rights or housing rights. It is all connected. And the thing that connects it all is that we are currently living under a system of domination and extraction. And domination because 500 years ago, there were empires on this globe that decided to go exploit other people and other places for the benefit of their own, and really for the benefit of predominantly white people. And we are still living under that system. We are still living under a system in which certain bodies are exploited and are dispensable while in the service of other bodies. And again, I'm not just talking human bodies. Human bodies are a big part of it. If you look at globally, who is suffering the most as a result of exploitation, it is dark-skinned people, it is poor people, it is women and children. And, these systems of domination, it's also about extraction, right? Because there was, when the Spanish came, they extracted all the gold they could. The Russians extracted all the pelts they could, driving extinction. There used to be beavers on this coast. They're gone. Otters. And all of that is gone. And so this idea that we can just take and take and take is the foundation of our economic system today. And that's why, even though we know that fossil fuels are destroying our planet, there is still a lot of fossil fuel, there's a lot of oil extraction. And guess where it's happening? In communities of color. So my role as an artist is about transforming worldview. It allows us to see the world in a different way. We do not have to live in a system of domination. We do not have to live in a system of extraction. We can instead experience partnership and regenerative economies, right? What would it be like if we lived in a world where we are not just trying to take from the earth, but we're trying to heal the earth? We're trying to support each other. We're trying to equitably distribute resources and not just concentrate them in the hands of the few. And this is the global reality, and it doesn't have to be that. And so that's what I work towards. You know, I'm an activist, and I work across issues. And really my center of my work is culture. And why culture? Because culture sparks our imagination. It allows us to feel, to experience something different. And it's a very, very powerful tool. When I was growing up, you know, I grew up in Oakland, and I was exposed to the Black Panthers. And, you know, the Bay Area is such a place where there's so much activism. And I was taught that social change happens in the world of politics, right? And what is the world of politics? Well, the world of politics is where laws are made, and it's where it's the systems of how we govern, right? And so, yes, a lot of social change happens in politics, but first, it has to happen in culture. There can be no political change until there is culture change. And so it's about how do we tell the stories that help people change their mind. And an example of that is, you know, when I was a teenager, Ellen DeGeneres first came out on national television. You know, Ellen was the first openly queer actor on a major television network. Before that, we did not have queer people on TV, believe it or not. This was 1997 when she came out on TV. What happened 18 years later is you had the Defense of Marriage Act, right? Excuse me, no, that was Clinton. 15 years later, what you had is you had gay marriage become legal at the Supreme Court. But when I was growing up, you had something called DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, that made it illegal for same-sex folks to get married. So I grew up in a very homophobic era, right? And what happened? You know, I was a queer kid, but I didn't really know. I didn't have examples. I didn't really it's just like, that didn't exist in the culture around me. And when I saw Ellen, and then Will and Grace, and then the L Word, and then the Queer Eye show, like all of these things started coming out, and it began to normalize the queer experience. And of course, it's a very white queer experience. I mean, it was not diverse, but nevertheless, it was a different kind of story that opened all of our imaginations, all of it. I mean, in the entire country, you immediately saw people change their mind about gay marriage. And that happened over a few years. So by the time that the Supreme Court heard it, it was just like, most people in this country were just like, okay, like gay marriage is okay, right? That is culture change. That is a change that happens. And even, you know, 10 years ago, we were not talking about pronouns, right? We now talk about pronouns. I actually realized I did not share my pronouns. I think they might be on my name. I can't tell because I can't see you guys, but I use she, her pronouns. And I love that we have this practice of a different kind of language that is not so cis-centric. That is culture change, right? Even the ability, you know, I'm just in the last few years have just learned how to set boundaries. And I love the fact that we live in a culture that now normalizes that. We now talk about boundaries. Because when I was growing up, I would tell if I tried to have a boundary with my mom, it would be like, nope, not going down like that. So culture change is important because culture is where we can begin to practice a different kind of future, right? Culture, imagine the culture of consent. You know, when I was watching 80s film, there was no consent. There's actually still not a lot of consent on TV, but it's changing. And so working in culture is a very powerful space to be because you can influence both the political sector and the economic sector. And you need all of these three to be working in order to make social change. And so I want to, you know, I'm going to give you another example just so you can understand how it is that these three work in order to change systems, right? Because we have an economic system, we have a political system, and we have a cultural system. So in 2012, you had in this country one of the most atrocious gun massacres, and that was at Sandy Hook Elementary, where 28 people died, most of them children, very young children. And at that point, throughout the country, people wanted gun reform. They wanted different laws. And it was just, it was such an intense moment of just sadness, but also just like, what is happening, right? Like, how did we arrive at a culture where something like that happens? And what we didn't know is that that would be normalized behavior, which we are still experiencing today. So 2012, back to 2012. At that point, we could have had a change in laws. Did we get a change in laws? No. Obama was not successful in getting through all of the laws that needed to get through. Even though you had a high population, a lot of people who wanted it to happen, it did not happen. And in the economic sector, you know, the Dick's Sporting Goods, the Walmarts, Smith Wesson, they could have done something, but they didn't do anything. So let's fast forward 6 years later to Florida, Valentine's Day, I always forget the name, Stoneman Douglas High School, another gun massacre. And this time what happened is that young folks who were young journalists, young organizers, young people who were part of their drama department, they took back their narrative. They were able, through their storytelling and through their activism, to create a change that was felt in both sectors. So within a few weeks, within 2 weeks, Dick's Sporting Goods changed their policies. And now you have the largest corporation, evil corporation, Walmart, talking about the government needs to do gun reform, right? That was in 6 years. And of course, you have the young organizers now organizing in politics. So it's so important to start with our stories. It's so important for us to actually share what we are experiencing, because when we do that, we're able to move people, because as human beings, we are highly emotional creatures. That's what neuroscience teaches us. We are very emotional. We react. Our bodies react. And, excuse me. Excuse me. I could give you a 10-page paper with a lot of facts and data on why we need different kinds of gun laws, but that is not going to touch you in the same way that emotions do. And that's the power of culture, is that we speak to the heart. We help people imagine something different. We take them somewhere else. And that's why I work in culture. It's why I'm an artist. And it's also why I really advocate for the role of culture, because a lot of times people think like, you know, culture is just neutral. Culture, you know, you just go to the movies, you're like, okay, let's see what we're going to watch. But there's a lot of there is a battle for your imagination. Like, culture is not neutral. Culture is a battleground. We are in times of cultural war. There is a cultural war happening. So yes, you might go and you might watch a movie, but then who funded that movie? Is the military involved in funding that movie? Is big oil involved? Like, how is that movie made? How many perspectives are in that movie? So culture is not neutral, and it actually matters. It really matters who has cultural power. This is a photo from my studio, and it shows you a little bit of how I work. I am largely a paper-based artist. A lot of the work that I do is about getting my images out into the streets, into the public realm. And I do it as a paper artist, because, you know, I'm not going to paint one fancy canvas and then put it in a nice gallery. I'm not going to do that. I'm about getting my art out into the public, out into the realm of pop culture, because I want as many people to see it as possible. This one here is one of my pieces, Migration is Beautiful, one of my most popular pieces that really exemplifies like how art can really be about the big story, you know, because a lot of times we hear, oh, people shouldn't cross the border, right? Because this is our sovereign line and this is our country. Well, nature doesn't have borders. Why did we create borders? Borders are meant to keep people in and keep others out. And nature did not intend for there to be borders. In fact, we as human beings have been moving since the beginning of time. And we're not the only species that moves. Butterflies move, birds, salmon, everything. Actually, a lot of things move. And this piece celebrates the monarch butterfly, which flies from Mexico through the US and Canada. And I wanted to make an art piece that reminded everyone, and especially us as human beings, that migration is actually how we survive. It is a beautiful thing. It is part of nature. And we don't need borders. I don't believe, I think that borders are very painful places. They are wounds, because a lot of people die trying to cross them. And it's really sad that the United States, a lot of countries in Europe, they went and they exploited Black and brown communities. And now those Black and brown people, they took their wealth, they took everything. And now folks are trying to come get a piece of it, and then they're blocked out, right? It's just, it's very unjust. And so this piece is about reminding us that we are a part of nature and that migration is a beautiful thing. This other piece, freedom, justice, voice, power, is also, you know, really exemplifies my work around showing our power. You know, for a long time, I did art that was about fighting and suffering. And for 10 years, actually, I did that. And I decided to stop doing that because I realized that I don't want to just be about pain-oriented narratives. I want to be about joy and power-oriented narratives, right? Like, I especially noticed this as we are experiencing another re-traumatization of state violence against Black and brown bodies, right? Like, that we are experiencing an onslaught of pain and death. And it really does something to our minds, right? I don't need to see a video to know that a 13-year-old kid was shot. I don't need to see that. So my art is, I try to do themes that are about empowerment. And it's not that I'm ignoring the pain, it's that I think we need to both imagine a future, but we also, if we're going to deal with pain, we need to have a process for repair. We actually need to have a process for truth, reconciliation, and repair. And that means holding the truth of what happened and what has been happening. And how do we grieve through that? How do we really sit with the pain of it? And how do we make amendments and name it, right? Like, I mean, we live in a country that has yet to apologize for slavery. You know, can you imagine that? There's other countries that have done campaigns around saying, I'm sorry. And we're not there yet. So it's a very important part of my work to celebrate the aspirational. This is a piece that I did for the People's Climate March in 2014, which to date is the largest demonstration in the United States around climate. And I did this piece, it says, Defienda nuestra madre, defend our mother, to also, you know, show a woman of color mama as the face of the climate movement, because I think a lot of times when we think about climate change, and it's Leonardo DiCaprio talking, or our friend Mark Ruffalo, or it's just a lot of white guys, I feel like we have a branding problem when it comes to climate, that we are either talking about melting glaciers or polar bears, but guess what? You wouldn't have climate change if you didn't have racism, right? Because racism is what allowed the oil companies to come put oil extraction in our communities. If people would have said, you know what, little Favi doesn't deserve to breathe dirty air, so we need to do something about these trucks. You know what? We need to switch to electric. Why didn't they do that? Like, why don't we advocate for communities of color so that we don't have to get sick? Because when you do that, you will solve climate change, right? When we say, hey, let's stop, polluting our water systems, because let's follow what indigenous people say, we won't have climate change. If we did not have white supremacy, we would not have climate change, because, we would not have a climate crisis, because white supremacy is what got us here. And we can never forget that. We can't forget that the climate crisis is the direct result of land grabs, of stealing, of devaluing the earth, and of normalizing this idea that we have to destroy. And that it's totally normal to blow up a mountain, or it's totally normal to frack. What's wrong with, running a pipeline through the water? That is what white supremacy has done. And don't even get me started on the fact that all the heads of the major oil companies in this country are run by white men. So it's not a far, it's the reality. This piece is a recent collage that I did that's about rejecting the fossil fuel economy and instead working towards a clean energy future where we can restore and we can protect, right? And we can get in right balance with nature, because really our planet is just the impact and the suffering that's happening, whether you look at how much hotter it's getting, or, climate migration, or you even look at the fact that here, in my home state of California, where you're having wildfires resulting from drought, which is resulting from water policy. And then you have poor forest management, which results from ignoring indigenous wisdom. And then guess what? Guess who has to fight the fires? Prisoners at $2 a day. Prisoners in prison, right? And do they, it was just in the last year where they're finally starting to allow them to become firefighters, but that was not the case, right? So it's just so many layers of exploitation, and we have to be able to name it. And that's what I try to do in my art. Similarly, in my work, I am about celebrating my relationship to the natural world. So my hometown, Oakland, where I live, it's super industrial. It's very dirty. As you can see, the freeway's right there. It's just like, I feel like I grew up in a concrete jungle. And my parents were hardworking immigrants, and we went camping every once in a while, but it's not like we would go, take walks in the forest or nothing like that. And only now in my adult life am I repairing my relationship to nature, because I would be like, nah, I don't want to camp. Like, I like being in the city. And then I realized what it had done to me, like that I didn't feel, I felt like my mental health was being impacted. And it was because we all need to be connected to nature. Like we're a part of nature. It's like historical, like, it's like our ancestors spent time with nature. They were farming, they were doing all of that. And it's what we humans do. Like, we're not just here to work. We're not here to sit in like little cubicles and look at our computers all day. And we're not here to just live in these concrete cities. We're here to be humans. And that means interacting with nature. And so for me, having plants, this is actually my living room. You can see my blue couch. having plants is a way for me to do my healing work and to reconnect with my ancestral practice of working with plants. These are 3 works that I did around gender justice. You know, I'm very active in gender justice movements. And in order for us to topple the patriarchy, we need power, right? We need more femmes, non-binary people, trans people in power. We need to repair what patriarchy has done, because patriarchy has created a crisis of sexual assault that we have to repair. And we need equity. And so this is my triptych of gender justice. And, you know, speaking of the power of stories and why it's so important to release our stories so that we can change culture is the Me Too movement, right? Founded by Tarana Burke, who you see here in the center. Tarana Burke founded Me Too many, many years ago, but it only became popularized in 2018. And what it led to was a lot of survivors sharing their stories. I mean, survivors from all walks of life, including rich and powerful women in Hollywood, right? Sharing their stories. And this is like culture change to the max, because sexual assault existed before and it was very normalized. But when people began to share their stories, especially women, something happened, which is that we believed survivors. We began to believe them. And that is the culture change that happened, to the point where, you know, when you had a new Supreme Court Justice nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, and there was allegations against him by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. I'm sure you all remember the hearings. Those hearings would not have happened if it were not for Me Too. So there was culture change. Was there political change? No, not yet. We don't have political change. The laws around sexual assault are awful. They don't work. We have a sexual assault problem on a lot of campuses. So clearly something is not working, but culture has changed and we're not going back. And the world of economics has definitely changed, right? I mean, you see people getting fired, and that was not happening 10 years ago. That wasn't even happening 5 years ago. So this is really the power of story. And, you know, earlier I said that I was talking about going to the movies, right? And I just want to show you this example, because why is it that I organize in culture? Well, first, by now you should understand how powerful culture can be. But who controls culture in this country? Like, who controls Hollywood, the visual arts, performance, publishing, gaming? Who's in power, right? Whose stories are we seeing? Well, Hollywood, if you could see here, 96% of film directors are men and 94% of them are white, which means that a lot of what we're seeing on Netflix, on HBO, on Hulu, it's actually a white man's perspective, right? And this is kind of like this is like criminal. Like, why does this exist? You know, I now that I'm starting to work in film and television, and a few years ago I started like, okay, let me watch some shows, let me check out what all the hype is about. And I was just like, wow, there is a lot of sexual assault on TV. It is like a little bit normalized. And when you understand that there's this many white men in power, I'm like, oh, that's why. Because they are creating narratives that are extensions of their imagination, right? If I was to be in power, and if you had women of color in power, I can assure you we would be telling very different kinds of stories. And this is actually why we need to fight for cultural justice, because it's not enough to have one Black show or one Latinx show, not when the system looks like this, because that's not going to do anything, right? We need to be able to have a more equitable system in which we can see multiple perspectives, because otherwise we are not going to see perspectives and we're not going to see solutions. So one thing that I think few people know, but there is actually not a lot of content on TV that talks about climate change, right? I mean, I'm not talking about, you know, the Netflix Earth stuff. I'm just talking about regular old TV shows. They don't really talk about climate change. And in fact, in 2019, there was only 3 TV shows that mentioned climate change, one of them being Big Little Lies. Why? Well, because you have an imbalance of power. You have an imbalance of power. And so if you don't have like indigenous people, we are not going to see the kinds of stories that we need to see around the earth. We're not. We need to be seeing multiracial stories. So it's one big thing that I organize around. So I'm going to be moving into the final section of my presentation before we move into Q&A. This is my studio. I just like to show people where I work, what my space is like, and you know, where I create. You know, speaking of the moment we are in, I'm very active in movements to defund the police, and really because in major cities, including Oakland, including Los Angeles, probably your city too, the police take up 50% of our revenue, of our city revenue, 50%. And meanwhile, I'm in Oakland, where we have a huge houseless crisis, right? And so for me, it's really about the allocation of resources. How are we allocating resources? Because clearly the cops don't keep people safe. They really don't. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, and it's actually quite sad and awful, but we're in the middle of a trial of one of the most atrocious acts of police violence. And during that time, since March 29th, there have been 3 more very public police killings. And there's no accountability. This is not new, y'all. I mean, this has been since 1990. It's been for a lot of years, but I clearly remember 1992, Rodney King, right? My friend Chuck D from Public Enemy made a post that said, the only thing that's changed is the camera quality of how we document this. And it's really sad to say that. But we are also in a moment of culture change, right? Like in my city, we have managed to pull police out of the school district. That's a big deal. And now you have different cities around the country who are really thinking about how we are going to move away from this punitive punishment economy that allows for our communities to be treated in this way. And, you know, instead of so much money towards policing, we could be spending money on gardens, right? On crops, like growing stuff. And that's what I have my own garden, and I'm really an advocate of gardening, because I think we need to move towards supporting life, not taking away life, but supporting new life. You know, let's grow some stuff. Let's heal. Let's heal with the earth. These are the last few of my works. This is a piece I did during when the economic crisis really began to get bad last year because of COVID. And just seeing that, like, wow, you know, like, I don't know if you all remember, but when we first started hearing about just how much richer rich people were getting, I was like, wow, just, we really live in a twisted system where you have people who are barely making it, and then you have the excess, the rich. Something needs to be done. I created this piece, and, you know, talking about boundaries, a lot of times as I'm doing my own healing work, I make art about it, right? I made this piece in 2019. It's so funny because I'm still in this space. Like, I'm learning how to have boundaries, how to protect my energy, because I was raised As a woman of color, daughter of immigrants, I was raised to be everything for everybody, to put everyone's needs before mine. I didn't really get taught to say no. I had to say yes, because if you didn't say yes, then you were selfish, or you were bitchy, or you were conceited. All of these things that are so loaded, especially when I think we have a very unrealistic expectation of Black and brown women needing to take care of everyone. And I'm trying to break that cycle. This other piece, feel it all, come with me. This piece is actually just about my relationship to my body. And that, you know, my ancestors, their bodies were exploited against their will. And similarly, my immigrant parents, my dad especially, I mean, he worked very, very hard up until he died. And I think about, you know, this concept of work and how in this capitalist system, we are taught that we only matter if we're productive. And it's just such a, you know, and honestly, most of the time it's bodies of color that are forced to exploit the natural world, right? And so when I think about all the farm workers, you know, mass agriculture is bad for the world. It's bad for the environment. Like, we already know that we need biodiverse agriculture, right? But immigrants are forced to hurt the land. I mean, they're also, if you look at who works at slaughterhouses, right? And like the atrocities that are being committed in factory farms, who is forced to do that labor? Who is forced to clean up toxic waste dumps? Who is forced to have to clean up after fires? It's poor people, it's people of color. And so our bodies have been used as a weapon against the natural world. And for me, I am trying to reclaim my body and to use my labor to heal, to help heal, and also to not hurt the earth. It's actually why I'm vegan. I don't want to participate in the system that exploits other beings. Because I'm trying to get into right relationship for myself and just to do some of that healing work. And, you know, it's not just healing for myself, it's for future and for past generations, because I'm the first in my family who could really go to therapy even, right? I have access to those kinds of tools. And my parents didn't really have access. They were too busy. And it just culturally, it wasn't for them, but they prepared everything so that I could benefit from that.
Favianna,
Yeah.
I just wanted to check in. We have a couple of questions from the audience, but I don't, you know, everything that you're saying is awesome, so I don't.
Okay, cool. I'll wrap up in like 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thanks.
So these last pieces that I'm showing, survivor justice. This is about what it feels to be believed, you know, to be believed. And then finally, this piece of no going back. You know, a lot of times people are like, oh, you know, after the pandemic, things are gonna go back to normal. We don't need to go back to normal because it wasn't normal, it was abnormal. And how do we treat this pandemic as something that we come out on the other side of in more balance, but also in more harmony with each other and with Mother Earth. So with that, let's get into questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was incredible. So I forgot to mention this at the beginning, and basically Favianna is available until 2:30, but we did sort of reserve some time just for BC students. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is take about 10 to 12 minutes or so, and I'll keep times for questions for this talk. And then after that, I'll ask non-BC students to leave the call, and BC students can just have an open, informal kind of Q&A with Favianna directly. And that was something that I noticed one of the MLK events did, and I thought it was a great idea. So there are a couple of questions already in the chat, and I invite people who ask those questions to just unmute and ask them if you'd like to do it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've got a question. Well, actually, no, not a question, a comment. Like, I actually, I'm autistic, and because of that, I fear for my life whenever there's police as well, because I've read about like police killing autistic people. Oh, you're muted.
Yes. Yeah, I actually just did a piece on neurodiversity, actually. And I didn't know about the neurodiversity movement, but just so that folks know, there is a movement now to understand that there's a diversity in people's minds and a diversity in how people interact with other people, with sounds. And for a long time, I think in our culture, we have lived under a culture that has said that autism is bad. But if we were to shift the frame a little bit and more say like, actually, different minds work in different ways, and we need to stop just normalizing one kind of way. And so that has, it's called, you can Google it, there's a whole neurodiversity movement, which is really centered around autism and like moving towards a culture of more acceptance and embracing instead of medicalizing it. And so I just did an art piece for that, which I'm going to try to find. But yeah, you're right. And actually, what we are experiencing a system in which people with disabled people, autistic folks with mental health challenges actually face more danger with interacting with law enforcement, because law enforcement does not get the training to actually work with people of different mental capacities. And that's a huge part of the problem. And if you look at who is getting killed by law enforcement, in many situations, it is people who are not like the typical functioning kind of person that we might think. So it is a real problem. Thank you for naming that.
Yeah, I've been like speaking out against the police for the past couple of years lately. I've thought I've thought all cops are bad. I've told off people who still supported the police even after police brutality. Like I told them that they were wrong.
Thank you.
Can I go? Hi, Favianna, thank you. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Recently, I have been reading about the lack of green space in urban areas.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen movements to try and get green space back into those areas? And if so, what is it done for communities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue because we're also dealing with a crisis in affordable housing. And I think I've been a part of a lot of urban planning gatherings. And I think there's an overall shift to more sustainable environments, which include green spaces, but also bike lanes. And now with COVID, it's become clear that we also need spaces to congregate where you don't have to pay. And not just that, with the climate crisis, we're going to need cooling centers. Mm-hmm. We're going to need places for people to breathe when the air is really, really bad. And that is what we call adaptation, right? And so I do think green spaces are so important. And, the kind of movements we're seeing is also gardens, rooftop gardens, like just, getting as many spaces that do not need to be covered with cement to really reconnect with the soil. So I think I think it's critical for us to reimagine our spaces, because most human beings are going to be living in cities, and we have to be able to shift to more sustainable ways, including solar power. So things like that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions out there? If I have one, I would love to hear. So Favianna, love your art, and I wanted to hear your sense of, sometimes there's like this sense about art that it shouldn't be so explicitly political and explicitly, kind of knock over your head with the message, and that subtler messages are stronger. It's not something that I per se feel, but I'm wondering, have you felt that message? How do you address it? What kind of, what do you draw on when you address that?
Yeah, so I think, in a white supremacist, male-centric culture, the art of white men is always going to be held as the standard, right? And so when I was a kid, I would tell my teachers, hey, I want to be an artist. And they're like, that's great, Fabi. Check out Picasso, Rembrandt, Matisse, I was Monet. And I was like, wow, these are all white guys from Europe. And that was the canon, right? And so when I heard about female artists, they're like, oh, but they're feminist artists, or those are Black artists. And that's what white supremacy does, is that it makes us think that one kind of art is normal, which means that if I make art about my lived experience, which is, I've experienced racial inequity, it's seen as divergent from the center, and therefore it's seen as something political, or it's Latino art, or it's angry feminist art. But in reality, all art reflects a point of view. You just can't get around that, period, right? All art, as an artist, you bring your whole self into your work. You make work from your lived experience. And so you can't disconnect the artist from the art. And so when I hear people say, oh, well, your art is political, I'm like, all art is political. When you're drawing a little landscape with some rich people hanging out in the park, that is a point of view. That is a political statement, because of what you are seeing, you are making it, there's power in an image, right? And so I believe all artwork is political. All artwork reflects a point of view. And what we need is more points of view. And we need more points of view to be understood and seen as normal, right? So in other words, why is it that on TV, on movies, I could see like a white guy be an astronaut, or he could be hanging out with dragons, or maybe he falls in love with the computer, or maybe he's like stuck on a boat. Black people can do that too, but where are the stories about that? And so then we start associating whiteness with the ultimate depiction of humanity, because that's what we see, right? But if we lived in a different world in which the stuff we saw was more diverse, I can assure you we would be in a less racist reality. If we were to see on television, like, depictions of women, non-binary people, trans people that were normal, right? Like, why is it that we have these ridiculous like beauty standards and image standards for women? Well, it's because that is what is shown back to us. But if we were to move towards a culture that is like shows people equally, right, of all shapes, of it just doing normal things, that would impact us. It would change us. And so I believe that everything that you see, hear, interact with is actually from a perspective. And it's up to you to find out, what is that perspective coming from? What is the intention of that? Whose reality is it reflecting? And also, how do I find the culture that speaks to me? How do I surround myself with culture that helps me think in a different way and that helps me unlearn, right? This is actually why I really, oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you, Julieta. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big thing. So yeah, I mean, even with this, I encourage all of you, listen to Black women, listen to the stories of Black families, listen to what it means, what this moment means, and make an assessment of where your information is coming from and fine tune it so that you're not just seeing one perspective.
I had a question, Favianna. You spoke of and connected our culture's kind of attitudes about women's bodies and the same kind of domination and extraction attitudes that's normalized with the environment. And I wonder what kind of personal actions, conversations in our community or community activism we could do around that.
Yeah. So I think, I've been very influenced by the environmentalist Judy Berry, and actually by also Indigenous women leaders who really talk about that the way we treat the earth is the way we treat women, right? Dominate, violate, assault. And it's true. I mean, if you look at the dairy industry, right, and what happens to female cows who are forcibly impregnated, I mean, they're really raped, forcibly impregnated 9 times in their lives. They're just used as production machines and then they're slaughtered. We live in a society in which the female body, right, the life-giving body is highly, highly exploited. And that when we talk about environmentalism, we have to understand that the ecosystem, the earth is a body, it's alive, right? Like when we go in and we just disrupt a body, it's an assault on that body. And we've been taught to think that, well, that body doesn't have feelings. Like, these animals, they don't have feelings, but that's not true. Actually, what we're learning, some of the most cutting edge science, of course, is telling us that most animals are sentient beings, but it's also telling us that trees are highly intelligent, that there are mycelium networks that connect trees. And so if we can, imagine there was a culture that said, just cut these things down, whatever, we're gonna just destroy forests because these are inanimate objects, but they're not inanimate objects. And actually, Indigenous people for a very long time have been telling us that we have to protect life, right? We have to protect the trees. We have to protect the oceans, the forests, the Amazon. And I think we need to really align with that. And that means following Indigenous leaders. It also means honoring and respecting the living being that is the earth and all of the creatures on earth. And so I think it's about how we talk about it, right? Like, so when we talk, as a vegan, I don't just say I don't eat meat, because when people think meat, they don't really think about factory farming. I say I don't eat carcass. I don't eat a dead body. I don't eat tortured animals. I don't do that because I am trying to live in another way. I'm trying to actually end systems of exploitation. And for me, that means not eating certain things. So I think it's about how we talk about it, and also to be able to always, I really love the author, Robin I can never say her name, Killimer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, who talks about our language really makes a difference, right? When we talk about the oceans, let's talk about all life in the oceans. Let's talk about what's in the oceans, the power of the oceans. when we talk about forests, let's talk about ecosystems, and instead stop objectifying nature, and instead really start talking about it in a way that allows us to see the full complexity and the gift really that it is.
Great, thank you.
I love this. Oh yeah, America. So yes, America Ferreira did my reading. She's my friend actually. But yeah, I love her a lot. So thank you for that comment, and thank you for reading that chapter.
I would like to take a moment to thank you, Favianna, for being with us. And if we could all give just a, either just a visual or use the reactions to thank you. Thank you so much. And what we'll do is we'll stay on here, and I'll ask, BC faculty and members of the public to get off the Zoom call. And any students who would like to stay, please stay. Favianna will be available until 2:30 for a more informal Q&A. So if your questions didn't get answered, or you wanted to wait for that moment in order to have some time. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Favianna, how can we support your art and your work?
Yes, so let me, so that is my online shop. And then you could also follow me on Instagram. I will send you my profile. There you go. Yeah, so follow me there, and I post a lot of art workshops. I post a lot of things around the issues that are important to me. So thank you all for coming.